Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Still reading this book. I spent a little bit of time on it this morning. Mr. Calloway really has some very, very important things to say. Let me share something with you from page 86. He's talking about impurity, defilement, the different kinds of impurity that were in Israel. And he talks about, number one, ritual impurity. Ritual impurity. You know, we might have a tendency just to lump all forms of sin, all forms of defilement, all forms of impurity all together. But there's a nuance in Scripture, and I'm not sure that I had thought about it before, but he points it out. And he says, ritual impurity derives from bodily flows, corpses, etc., leading to temporary contagious impurity resolved by bathing, ritual ablutions, and waiting time periods. Then, he points out, there was moral impurity, which derives from sin, such as idolatry, incest, and murder, leading to the defilement of the sinners, the land, and the sanctuary, which is only resolved by atonement, punishment, or exile. That's pretty insightful stuff right there. And when I read it the very first time, I was like, okay, going to have to think about that. And then it made perfect sense that the defilement from touching a dead body certainly did not carry the same punishment that idolatry carried. So there's obviously ritual versus moral. Anyway, just some good insights into that book. And again, the name of it is The Sabbath and the Sanctuary. Now, the reason I'm reading that is because I've been working for the last 5 or 6 years on a book on the Sabbath. And as soon as I get my book that I'm currently working on, which I've had major problems with, formatting problem. But anyway, when this book is done, when it's in the can, I'm getting back to my book on the Sabbath. So I've been doing more research on the Sabbath. Okay, back to Matthew chapter 22. In Matthew 22, we very clearly have a parable about a wedding, just like we have a parable about the wedding in Matthew chapter 25. Well, Matthew chapter 22 is very clearly set in the context of the destruction of Jerusalem. A great king made a great wedding feast for his son. He sent out his servants to call those who had been invited. Those who had been invited began to make excuses and to say, well, you know, I've got a field. I've just bought a field. Got to go look at it. Oh, really? You bought land sight unseen, huh? Oh, I bought a team of oxen. Got to go try them out. Oh, you bought a car sight unseen, right? To give an analogy. But they began to mistreat the servants who were sent to invite them. They beat them, treated them spitefully, and finally they killed them. And the king of the wedding was extremely angry. He sent out his armies, and he killed those wicked men, and he burned their city. That was AD 70, obviously. Now, pardon me. If it is the case, follow me closely here, and please catch the power of this. If it is the case that the time of the wedding of Matthew chapter 22 is the time of the wedding of Matthew 25, 1 to 13, then since it is the case that the time of the wedding of Matthew chapter 25 is the time of the coming of the Son of Man, i.e. the second coming, then since it is true that the time of the wedding of Matthew 22 was to be at AD 70, then it must be true that the coming of the Son of Man for the wedding of Matthew chapter 25 was in AD 70. Well, again, I shared with you yesterday how the detractors of covenant eschatology, all of a sudden, while they condemned dispensationalists for inserting a 2,000-year gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9, they vehemently condemned that paradigm. They come to Matthew chapter 22, and they say, well, you see, the wedding was at hand, all things are ready, come to the feast, but the servants, or excuse me, those who had been invited rejected the offer. And they killed the servants. So the king killed them, destroyed their city, and then he sent out his servants to invite others. Which means, we are told, the kingdom, oh wait, they don't want to say it that way. You don't want to, or you will not find, or I should say, it's hard to find, an amillennialist or a postmillennialist who will gladly say, well, yes, the kingdom was postponed. That's almost anathema. That's dirty talk. And yet, when they say, well, the wedding was supposed to be in AD 70, but the Jews rejected it, so the invitation to the wedding is still going out. Well, then that means if the invitation for the wedding is still going out, then the message is, all things are ready, come to the feast. So, that must mean that the wedding has been ready, near, for 2,000 years. We're supposed to believe this. We are supposed to believe that the wedding was postponed. I want to appeal to my amillennial and my postmillennial friends who have implicitly or explicitly adopted this view that yes, the wedding was supposed to be in the first century. The invitation went out, all things are ready, come to the feast. Now look, folks, you know, the king said, the fatted calf is ready, to use that terminology, to paraphrase the text. The animals have been slain. The food is ready. Don't you think after 2,000 years the food would spoil? Listen, folks, imminence permeates this message. You can't delay the wedding for 2,000 years without violating the text and what it says explicitly. And yet, once again, that is exactly what amillennialists and postmillennialists are doing when they say, well, yes, the wedding was supposed to take place, and yes, verse 7 was AD 70, but the invitation is still being sent out. Well, let me say this again. If you take that view, you have become a dispensationalist. You have adopted the gap doctrine, for which there literally is not a shred of evidence. And your doctrine is full of holes. Your doctrine is full of gaps. Now, very quickly, to drive this home, in Revelation chapter 18, we find the destruction of the great city Babylon. Who is Babylon? Babylon was the city, number one, that killed the Old Covenant prophets. Revelation 16, verse 6. Number two, it is the city where the Lord was crucified. Revelation 11, verse 8. It is the city guilty of killing not only the Old Testament prophets, but killing the apostles and prophets of Jesus. And in doing all of this, they were filling up the measure of their sin, and judgment was coming soon, quickly, and shortly. Now listen to me very carefully. Jesus in Matthew said it was Old Covenant Jerusalem, Judah, and Israel that had killed the Old Testament prophets. Matthew 23, 29 and following. They were going to kill him, Matthew 16, Matthew 21. They were going to kill his apostles and prophets. They were going to fill up the measure of their sin in that generation and would be judged in that generation. Matthew 23, 36 and following. 34 and following, excuse me. Is there any doubt about who Jesus was talking about? Is there any doubt about who had killed the Old Covenant prophets? It certainly was not some amalgamated composite city. Only one city had ever killed the Old Covenant prophets. Only one city is where the Lord was slain. Only one city is the city of which Jesus said it's not possible for a prophet to perish outside of Jerusalem. Now, he wasn't speaking in some woodenly literalistic manner. He was using, if you wish to use the term, hyperbole, but he was nonetheless laying the guilt, laying the blame for the killing of the prophets squarely at the foot of Old Covenant Israel. And he said, Luke chapter 11, 49 and following, "Behold, I send to you apostles and prophets, and you're going to kill them." He never said that about any other city. And yet we are supposed to come to the book of Revelation, and we're supposed to see, and we're supposed to believe that, Jerusalem is involved, but not the ultimate. The real Babylon is some kind of a composite city that has nothing whatsoever to do with the guilt, the actual literal guilt iterated by the book of Revelation. Or it might be a sinful city in this contrived doctrine, but it's not the literal city. And then, not only do they invent this composite Babylon, they deny, they mitigate, and they pervert the urgency of the imminence found in the book of Revelation. These things must shortly come to pass. So we have this city in the book of Revelation, Babylon, guilty of all of these sins. What does Revelation say about Babylon and the wedding? At the time of that destruction, Revelation 19 verse 6, "Let us rejoice and be glad because the time of the marriage of the Lamb has come." I'm sorry, folks, it just doesn't get any better than that. It doesn't get any clearer than that. Destruction of Babylon, no other city fits the bill. Destruction of Babylon, the marriage of the Son. The Son who is coming, Revelation chapter 19, riding on the white horse, with a great sword coming out of his mouth, with a name written on his thigh, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Who is that? You know who it is. It's the Son of Man. This is the coming of the Son of Man for the wedding of Matthew 25. So we have Matthew 22, time of the wedding, inextricably bound up with the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. And we have Matthew 25, the wedding at the coming of the Son of Man. And we have Revelation, the coming of the Son of Man, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, at the time of the destruction of Babylon, the city where the Lord was crucified. It doesn't get any clearer than that. We'll have some more to say about that on the flip side. I'll see you there.